Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today, we are going to be talking about a shared death journey, what that is, and we're going to be talking to Dr. Sharon Prentice about her experience with a shared death journey. So, welcome, Sharon.
Hey, CJ, thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. It's a new term, so tell me a little bit about what a shared death experience is. So, just start off with.
Okay, a shared death experience is almost absolutely identical to the near-death experience, and everyone knows what a near-death experience is. The only difference is that the person having the experience is not dead, is not dying, most times is perfectly well, and happens to be with someone who is dying, and that person is invited along on the journey to what I call witness the afterlife and get a peek into foreverness. So it's just like a near-death experience, except for the fact that that person on that journey has been invited along with the person who has died.
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever heard of this. And in your book, I've talked about people who've had near death experiences, but in your
Uh-huh.
book, you talk about the elements that people have of a sheer death experience. They see the light, they see their deceased relatives of the dying come to meet them. They see the spirit of
Right.
the dying rising up from the body, described as a misty glow or grayish cloud. They sometimes participate in the panoramic life view of the dying person,
Mm-hmm.
and then they
Mm-hmm.
feel
There's
the dimensions of the room around them. So, wow, so you actually experienced this both with your daughter and then your husband, is that right?
Well, the actual shared death experience I had was with my husband when he died.
Okay.
It was with my daughter. Anyone who's ever lost a child can tell you just kind of check out for a while. I didn't actually have the experience with her. But I believe that was one of the things that led up to exactly why that type of an experience was given to me when
Mm,
my husband died. Yes, there's all kinds of research out there as to why these things are happening. The shared death experience now is being researched so much all over the globe because it really is shedding new light on why these things happen, and it is just blowing apart the medical, explanations for why the near-death experiences occur. The medical community, scientific community, I should say, always likes to say that, it's oxygen deprivation and, they have to have some type of thing they can point their finger to and say, that right there is why. But the shared death experience, you can't do that because the people who have these, we're well. We just happen to be, with the person or invited along for some reason to see what's out there afterwards. So it's
yeah.
really not a new experience. It's just people are starting to talk about it.
So tell me a little bit about, and if it's okay, to talk about your daughter's death and how that set you up for experiencing what you did during your husband's death.
Sure. Um, Growing up, I had really had a wonderful life. I was one of the lucky ones that had great parents, and
Mm,
everything was wonderful. Everything came along easily for me, and I thought my whole life was going to be that way. And then I met this wonderful man. We got married, and I thought life is just so perfect. I got pregnant, and it was a really, really rough, horrible pregnancy. I was sick
mm,
the entire time. Matter of fact, my doctors told me that I probably shouldn't carry the pregnancy to term because it would end up killing me. But of
mm.
course, that was something that I wouldn't think of. And so I just got sicker and sicker and sicker, and the whole experience was just a horrible, horrible experience. So she was
Sorry.
born 2 months early, well, 2.5 months early she was born, and she lived for a little over 2 hours, and she died in my arms. And at that point in
Mm,
time, from the moment I went into labor to when she actually died, it was the bargains that you make with God sometimes.
mm-hmm.
If you,
Yes.
I will do this for you for the rest of my life if you will do this one thing for
Yes.
me.
Yeah.
There was a lot of bargaining going on during that time.
Mm,
I mean, it was
mm-hmm.
do this for me, do this for me, and then that turned into you better do this for me, and then it turned into God damn you. I don't know if I can say it on the radio, but it was one of those
Yeah.
things where
Yeah.
I was so full of rage. And at the moment when she died, something was born in me that had never been there before. It was just this inconsolable grief, just this well that just opened up inside of me that was full of the deepest, darkest, most horrible emotions that you could ever experience, because I didn't understand why this was happening to me. And that set me up. That really set me up in a battle that I was going to win. I had this existential battle all set up in my mind where I was going to beat God, and I was going to beat death at his own game. Didn't work out so well, but at the time that made sense to me. And I spent years and years battling, if that's the right word, that's the only word I can think of, just full of rage. And anyone who said anything good about God, or, the loving God, or the God bless you, or anything, I went after them with a vengeance. I was angry, so angry and full of grief. And that set the stage for me being so totally empty and devoid of anything good in my life. It set me apart from my family. It set me apart from my friends. It set me apart from my husband. It set me apart from everything, because I just walled myself up, and I didn't want to face what had really happened. And I think that's why I set this battle up that I was going to win. I was going to teach God a lesson that he couldn't do that to me. Well, the lesson got turned around, and my husband got sick. And it was a long while trying to figure out what was wrong with him. 8 years, as a matter of fact, 8 years of watching this man who was 6'3", 200 pounds, go down to 99 pounds.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
You just can't even imagine. So you can imagine what happened to me. I was more angry and more angry and more angry. Just beside myself, not knowing how to deal with my daughter's death, not knowing how to deal with what was happening to my husband, denying it. Right, even though I saw it right in front of me, I denied what was happening to him because I was going to win. Okay, I was going to beat death.
And how long was it? I know your husband was sick for 8 years, but how long was it from
8 years.
space? So 8 years from the time, you mean, but so when your daughter died, how much time had passed from your daughter dying to your husband then being sick for 8 years?
9 years. It was 9 years.
So 9 years of just like the grief of your child, and then another 8 years. Wow.
Yes. It was a very, very long time. Yeah, and I was one angry, bitter, really horrible person. You would not have wanted to be around me. I didn't want to be around me. Seriously. I did not know how to handle life. I really didn't, because you never think of these things as happening to you, okay? They're always going to happen to the other guy. And you never stop to think that to that other guy, that's you, And I had done everything right my whole life. And I had been taught from the time I was a little girl that if you do everything right, if you don't swear, you're not mean, you don't hit people, you do all things that are right, then everything's going to be fine. And I was taught, God to me was, the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston?
Yes.
You seen that movie? Okay, that was God. The guy in the big flowing beard and long hair and the big gown, and that was God. This thing that lived out there somewhere. And so when I lost Stephanie, though that bargain I was trying to make, there wasn't really anybody that I was actually trying to bargain with, because what I believed in didn't even exist. That was not God, as I was to find out later. So through all those years, this person that I was raging against, I was really raging against me. And this separation that I had set up between me and this God that I thought existed was really me separating myself from what was truly out there, trying so hard to get in and show me the truth and my truth. I know everyone has their own truth, but this entity, this force, this creative God was trying to get into me, and he was doing everything he could to let me know how much I was loved and that I was there, and I just threw it away because I didn't know. I really didn't know that that's what this was. There was so much anger and hatred and bitterness and animosity in me. I look back on that now and I realize that's probably what kept me alive. Was that anger. I know that doesn't make much sense to someone who has never lived in that kind of despair, but for people who are in despair and they don't want to admit it and they don't want to feel it and they don't know what to do with it or where to put it, you live in that rage, and it actually helps you put one foot in front of the other.
That makes sense to me in the sense that it makes sense to me in the sense that it's energy, right? Even it's passion, it's energy, it's life energy, and if you're grieving to the extent that it sounded like you did, you needed some form of energy, and that was the only thing that kept you going. Wow.
Yeah, and it really was. I didn't know where else to go because an entire lifetime of belief just fell apart. And I didn't know where to go to find what it was that I was missing. I discovered when my husband died, I'll back up just a minute. When my husband died, if you want to talk about why I think I was given this experience, I've been asked that question so many times by so many different people. As to why did this happen to you? I'm sure anyone who has any type of experience, whether it's a near-death experience or a shared-death experience, they're always asked, why you? Why did this happen to you? And I honestly can tell you, CJ, I absolutely believe that the reason I was granted that kind of experience was to literally save my life. Because because at the moment of his death, there just wasn't me anymore. I said in the book, I talked about the moment of his death. I was so sure he was going to be okay because he did something that was medically impossible. And when he took that last breath and breathed out, I breathed it in because it was like this, this sigh of relief. It was when I breathed in his breath that I realized that was his last breath. And it was inside my lungs, and I could feel it. And I just collapsed on the floor, and it was at that point that I completely, absolutely let go of me. There was nothing left of me anymore. And at that point, I think that's when God said, I got her now. I got her.
Wow. I've just got chills all over. Wow. So it's when you finally let go of the anger, the rage, the wanting to have life be meeting your expectations, then something greater could take over. But you were kind of stuck during those 17 years, it sounds like, in a place of just fighting.
And you know what it was? It was ego. It was flat out ego. And when I let go of me, who I thought I was, all the labels that get slapped on all of us from the time we're born, who we're told to be, all of that, it was gone because I could not take another step or another breath in this world. And it was at that point that God said, okay, she's mine right there. Wow. She's mine. I got her. Wow. Yep. And, the name of the book is Becoming Starlight, and it was always Becoming Starlight. And there were people that tried to talk me out of that because they're like, no one's going to understand that. And I'm like, yeah, they will if I explain it. Because it was at that point, I'm on my freaking knees, okay? There's nothing left of me when the world just started going, okay? The ceiling turned to mist and the floor disappeared even though I knew I was on it. And the walls of the room started to go away, and that was when I noticed the stars. The stars came to get me. Doesn't that sound strange? But that's exactly what happened. There were billions and billions and billions of them, and I swear to you, CJ, I could see each one of them independently and separately, and yet they were all one great, big, humongous star. And I went freely, and the reason I went freely is because there's a presence, okay? I felt this presence among the stars. I knew the presence. I knew I'd been there before. it was like home, and it was so incredibly comforting and inviting that I just gave myself over to it. I didn't fight it. I didn't ask questions. Because there wasn't a me left anymore, I became part of that presence that was in the stars. And I knew that was God. Not the Charlton Heston character, okay? Mm-hmm. But where I was going and what I was feeling and where I was meant to be, that was God. And that's when he showed me. That's when the whole experience started. That's why it's called Becoming Starlight, because I became Starlight, or did Starlight become me? I could not tell you which.
Or were you always Starlight and couldn't see? Right.
Yeah, exactly. That's it, you know. I have thought so much about that, and after this experience, of course, you think you're going crazy when something like that happens. You know it's real because it was more real. It was more real than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. And even to this day, the memory of that is more distinct to me than even things that just happened last week.
Yeah.
It's an odd experience.
It makes you question what's real.
To be able to say that.
Yeah, what's real and what's the illusion? Is our current experience, us talking on the radio now, the illusion, or is it starts blurring reality? I can tell, and I've heard that from many people. So when that happened, I just have so many questions. So at that moment, so some people talk about being greeted by a loved one, but in your case, you were greeted by just a presence of something greater than yourself, of God. So it wasn't necessarily a relative. And then what else happened when you had that?
I saw him. I saw my husband. It was the most remarkable. That's not even a word. There aren't any words for these types of experiences because our minds, our language is human, and that is an otherworldly thing that I do not believe anywhere in this world has there ever been a language that can have a word to describe what that's like. But after I just kind of gave in to this presence, because just the magnificence of the comfort and it was beyond comfort, beyond peace, beyond anything, any of those wonderful words you can think of that we all look for. That doesn't even come close to what it was. And when I kind of got my bearings, and that's not even right, that's even saying that isn't right, I saw my husband standing right in front of me. It was him. He was in his body, but here again, this is where it gets kind of Looney Tunes. He was standing in front of me, and I absolutely knew it was him, but I didn't touch him. He didn't touch me. He looked like he did before he got sick. He was well. He was glorious. He was smiling, and he was smiling at me. And I was looking at him, and I was smiling at him. And in a time like that, you think you're going to say the most profound thing in the whole entire universe. And all I said was, I can see you, I mean, I've thought about this so many times. I mean, why couldn't I come up with something that, is going to set the world on fire?
Or I love you, or like I'll miss you.
Yeah, something, but it was like, I can see you, It was commonplace, like it belonged.
Right.
Doesn't that sound odd? But it was nothing out of the ordinary because we belonged there. I think about it now and I think, oh my gosh, what this should have been a poem of some kind, but instead it was just, I can see you, and he didn't say anything to me. He just smiled at me, and I just smiled at him, and I knew he was alive. I knew he was alive, and by knowing he was alive, I knew Stephanie was alive. And I knew that he was going to go to be with her. But I also knew that I wasn't going to be allowed to go any farther than I already was. But you know what? It didn't bother me. People have asked me since, why didn't that bother you? Why didn't you want to go where he was? And the reason I didn't want to go, I guess, is because where I was, I knew I belonged. As I said earlier, I knew where I was. I knew that was my place. There's a chapter in the book that I call That Place, and I purposely don't call it heaven. And the reason I don't call it heaven is because when I say to you heaven, what do you think of, CJ, when I say the word heaven to you?
I imagine Charlton Heston in a robe filled with
There you
clouds
go.
and white, right?
And that is exactly why I don't say the word heaven when I named that chapter. I call it That Place because that place was my place. That was where I belonged. And I didn't want anyone to think that I was describing, the literal language that we are given as children, of what heaven looks like. We need those pictures when we're kids, we need
Right.
that. There's no abstract thinking going on. But I didn't want people to see a chapter called Heaven and go, oh, I know where she's going. Because that is not what I found. That is not what I found. And I knew Steve was going to be where he was supposed to be. And I knew Stephanie was going to be there, that she was there with him. That's all I needed to know.
But what did it look like, though?
Her.
So if it wasn't white clouds, what did it look like when you saw him? Was he like in your living room, or was he on the earthly plane but in a different form? I mean, what did it look like?
It was, this is so difficult to explain. I didn't see a place. There wasn't any grass for me. There wasn't any trees and flowers and streams and things that other people experience. For me, it was just, it was colors. We were standing in the midst of colors that weren't white and they weren't blue. It wasn't really, I know, I'm not making any sense, am I? It is so hard for me to describe. I was being held in presence. That's all I can say. And he was right there with me. Now, whether it's because this was a shared death experience and not a near-death experience where I didn't have, all of that, all the stuff that people who have the near-death experience see, that I don't know. All I know is that we were together in this place where we were supposed to be, where I was given this peek, like I said, I call it this peek into foreverness, where I knew that he was okay, and I knew that Stephanie was okay, and I knew that I was okay, because there wasn't a bit, not one bit of anger or rage or bitterness or anything left anymore. I knew exactly why things were the way they were, and the craziest thing of all, it was okay.
So when you went to the point of why did you do this for me for 8 years, and and why did you take my daughter away from me in that way? Like, was it just those thoughts fade away or nothing?
Yeah, it didn't matter. Didn't matter.
Interesting.
Isn't that weird? It didn't matter. It didn't matter. I knew that this was exactly the way it was supposed to be, and it didn't matter. Now, I have thought about this so much, and I have talked to priests and rabbis and ministers and Buddhist monks and everybody you can think of, trying to put a, fine tune to this over the years, trying to figure out how to get back. That's one of the reasons I do what I do. I work with the terminally ill. I became a clinical psychologist with a specialty in grief and death and dying, and everybody says, oh, how can you do that? And they think, oh, it's so wonderful, so unselfish. No, not at all. Quite the contrary. I did it in the beginning because I'm thinking, hey, if I can be with some of these people when they're dying, maybe I can hitchhike a ride back, I mean, and get back to where, seriously. I know that sounds odd, but it was such an amazing, wonderful place to be, I'd be a hitchhiker. Somebody take me with you. Just let me.
So you're trying to I want several shared death experiences with you all, so I'll just hang out with you.
But it never happened again. But
Oh,
and
wow.
so I wanted that so badly. That's why I talked to all of these people, and the people started pointing me to books, and one of the books that really helped me a lot. Really, there's two. One is one by St. Teresa of Avila, Her Interior Castle. And then Thomas More did one, Inner Heart, Inner Minds. And it talks about sacred words and centering prayer and contemplative prayer. I've thought so much about that because I don't know how much you know about that, but for eons, I mean, this comes to us from the Buddhists way, 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 way back, where they would use a sacred word, okay? And that sacred word would set them up for this centering prayer. And in centering prayer, the goal in centering prayer is to center your thoughts, your focus on God. Well, of course, I had no focus on God. I didn't even know who the heck he was or if this entity even existed. And at the moment when I breathed in my husband's last breath, now really, I've thought about this a lot. When my husband breathed in that last breath, the only sound I made was, you know, when you breathe out, when you just, the despair is so incredible that this noise that comes out of you.
Yeah, like a sigh, like,
I had thought,
oh, like that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I had this monk tell me that became my sacred prayer at that moment. And that was when I was saying to God, just help me. You know, just whatever it was my soul was saying. You know, the mystics say that inside of each of us, there is the heart of hearts, okay? In your heart, there is a spot. In your heart, in all of us that are living and breathing on this earth, in those hearts, there is a spot where God lives in you. And the only other thing, to use that word, that is allowed in that spot is you. When you awaken, when your soul awakens, and that is where you find your divinity within God, is in that heart of hearts that the mystics have talked about. So when I made that noise, if that became my sacred word, then that took me, see what I'm saying? That
Yeah,
took
so
me
that was your
right
kind of like,
into
there's
the
like,
very,
so like
yes,
some people say Om is like they're sacred, that's like a
exactly,
sacred sound. So this was your like
yes,
portal. There's a sound which is a
yes,
portal that got you into the heart of
yes,
consciousness. Oh, wow.
yes, and that's when God says, I got her, and he snatched me.
Wow.
And, you know, because that moment altered my entire life and the lives of my family and my community, because there were people in the room with me that I saw what was going on with them, but I even the doctor was he checked me to make sure I was still breathing because I wasn't moving, I wasn't doing anything, and yet I saw what was going on. My mom was actually by the door, and my mom had fainted. I saw that.
Wait,
When
you
I
saw
told
who
them that I
fainted?
saw
So,
that,
say that again. Say
my
that.
mother, my mom fainted, and I actually saw that, and I wasn't even looking at her. I didn't know what was going on, but I was able to tell them later that I saw what was happening. I was in both places, and yet I wasn't. I know that sounds so strange, but
No, if there's
where
no
I
time or
was,
space, you could be in both places at the
none,
same time.
zero. Time, I have told people who've asked me about time, time was not a function of my reality at all. There was no time, and what I have come to find since then, with all this research I'm doing, time really is for us here, you know, on this earthly plane. I mean, that's what I believe, because it did not exist. There was no need for it. It simply did not exist.
I
Most of
hate
the
to ask
things
this,
we
but
think
like
are so important.
how many minutes had passed? Like, so I just don't even understand. I want to be with you in that
Sure.
in the hospital room when, so your husband took his last breath. You're on the side with your eyes closed. You're on the side of like, are you passed out? Like, where are you, and how much time
I
passed
fell to
between?
the floor.
So you fell to the
I
floor.
fell to the floor. I fell to the floor. When I realized what had happened, when I realized it was his breath, I fell to the floor.
And
And then
did you pass
that's
out or?
all I remember.
Okay, and
No,
what did your
that's all
doc?
I remember.
What did your parents say happened to you or your doctor? What did it look like?
My doctor came over. The oncologist, my mom and my dad were in the room with me. My dad was sitting at the end of the bed. My mom had a chair over by the door, and the oncologist was sitting in front of the picture window, the big window that was in the room, and Steve's bed was in the middle of the room. And when he died, I just fell down to the floor, and that's the last thing I remember. According to them, I was down there for maybe a minute or two. The oncologist came over to me immediately because he thought I'd had a heart attack or something.
Right.
And he was checking my breathing, and yes, I was still breathing, but it was very, very, very slow. My heart rate had gone down into the 40s, which is really low. But I stood up, I don't remember standing up, but I stood up. And they said I started looking around, at the ceiling and looking at my feet. And I don't remember any of it. And then the next thing I remember was an hour and 32 minutes later. I was in a totally different room. My in-laws were in the room, and all of my other relatives were in the room. And my mom and dad, of course, were sitting right there with me. And what I said, once again, me, this profound poetic voice here, I looked at my dad, and of course they were very concerned with what was happening to me, and I had a blood pressure cuff on me, and I looked at my father and said to my dad, "Wow, that was so amazing." And of course they didn't have any idea what I know. I swear this is just the things that come out of my mouth at a time when something really, wondrous should be coming out, And they looked at me like, okay, and my oncologist said to me, all right, we're going to go to my office and we're going to talk about this. And it was my in-laws and my other relatives were so angry at me because my husband had just died. And here I was saying how amazing it was, and I was laughing.
Oh.
When I should have been.
In
See what I'm saying?
Yes. They're like, what's wrong with you? Aren't you? They thought you were in a hysteria or something, probably.
Exactly. But I wanted to tell someone immediately what had happened because it was so astonishing. I wanted to get it out before I forgot it.
Yes.
And as I'm telling them these things, and intermingled in that, I'm saying, Mama, you okay? Because she had passed out, and they all looked at me like I was crazy, because I knew what was going on, and I knew that my dad had come up to kneel down beside me when none of this. I should, I'm interspersing this with my story, and it was the most incredible thing, and it really it changed my life. It changed my community's life. It changed everything because, of course, word gets out really quickly around the hospital.
Right.
When things like this happen. But that's why I do what I do. And the reason I wrote the book, CJ, really isn't to bring any type of glory to anything that I do or anything else. It's because my patients wanted me to write it. I have been with so many people as they have gotten the diagnosis, or when they are dying, or with their families, so many, because I'm that person, the palliative care team that comes in and to do this. And if there's something I can do to relieve the fear and the dread that goes with dying, then I'm going to do it. I have shared this story with so many people, and all of them, their families have said to me, would you please write this down so when I'm not with you, or years from now when, I'm feeling overwhelmed or the grief hits me in the face again, I can read your story. So finally I decided, all right, I'm going to write it. And yeah, that's, and of course, because Steve and Stephanie mattered, their lives mattered. They changed an entire community. They changed my life and hopefully the lives of the people that I work with. So Starlight was really such a labor of love for me, getting this on paper as true to the story as I could possibly get it,
So I have so many questions related to this. So
shoot away.
Okay. All right. You said that. So is it comforting for your patients because they know that there is something wonderful that precedes that will happen after that they pass, and it's helpful for those who are their loved ones because they know that they're going someplace great and that they're never. Is that what helps them about the book?
Absolutely, it helps them. When there are if you look at the two things that scare people the most in this world, number one is public speaking, and number two is really seriously, and number two is fear of death. Okay, you think it'd be the other way around, but it's not, because we are not set up to think of ourselves as not being here. Okay, that self-preservation instinct is so enormous in our psyche that we cannot imagine us not here. So when you get that type of a diagnosis, or someone you love gets that diagnosis, the first thing that you think of is, oh, I'm not going to be here anymore. what's going to happen? Am I just going to go into nothingness? Am I, what's going to happen? And the family thinks, are they just going to be gone? I mean, how can they just be gone? That fear of turning into nothingness is huge when you get that type of a diagnosis. So in comes me or other people that I bring in, and we tell them our stories. Okay, I've seen so many things happen at the moment of death, and you know who has taught me the most? Children. When children are dying, it's the most grievous thing in the world, of course. But the things that they will tell you, it's absolutely mind-blowing, the things they will tell you. And I give those to my patients also, the things that kids say.
What do they
and when
say?
I tell people, oh my gosh, the kids will say, I had a dream, and if you want to believe it's a dream, fine, but these things are so vivid. And they will tell you about people that have come to talk to them, and they will describe the people. And they are their great-grandparents and their grandparents, or people that used to live next door, or they'll come back and they'll say, I met my brother or my sister who hasn't come yet. Things like that. And it's just, you'd sit there and your jaw just drops open.
Wow.
Because a lot of those things can be proved, because the mother or the father or the grandparents will say, oh my God, that was my mom, or that was a story my grandmother used to tell, or, that kind of a thing.
Right.
They're absolutely phenomenal. And so when I tell people, listen to me, okay? I'm not asking people to believe in me, okay? No one has to believe in me. I'm asking them to believe in the grandeur, just the wonder of this universe. I mean, God, energy never dies, okay? People can say that over and over and over again, but they don't really understand until they get some type of a death sentence. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, energy never dies, so what's going to happen to me? And so my story comes in and it says, well, you know what? Here's what happened to me. Is this going to happen to you? Yeah. I absolutely believe that these things are totally real, because there is no way that I was given that kind of an experience and felt that kind of absolute magnificence and love. It's got to be real, because I've never, ever felt anything like that before. I couldn't make that kind of a feeling up if I wanted to, because I didn't know that even existed. So giving that to other people. No, I can't take away all the fear. Nobody can take away all the fear. That's something that is impossible to do. But if I can alleviate it just a little bit, then my job is done.
Okay, so my dad passed away a long time ago, and I share with you the same kinds of experience, shared similar kind of just mad at like, how could this happen? I don't understand why this happened in this particular way. Why? That was my question. Like, why? What's the purpose? I don't get it. So did the question of why this happened? Why did your daughter have to die in that particular way? Why, or did that all drop, or did you ever get the answers of why?
You know what? I didn't ask, because at the time it didn't matter. Honestly, I know that sounds weird, because I spent so much of my life angry and
wondering why,
and just hate, wondering why. How can a gracious, loving God take a child? And you know what? The answer is, and you're not going to like this, the answer is, why not?
Right.
Seriously,
it is what it is.
We're all going to die. There are a lot of people who believe in pre-birth planning and all that. I don't, okay, but a lot of people do, and that's fine. Things happen. This world is not a perfect place. Our souls are here. This is what I believe. Our souls are here for a reason. The only reason you're here, CJ, the only reason you are here, the only reason I am here, the only reason anybody's here that's listening to this is because God thought of you, okay? You are his thought. It was like, okay, world, you need one of these, okay? And when he thought, I mean, seriously, okay?
No,
and
many religions think about that. You're a manifestation of individuated point of consciousness. That's what
you said it better than I did, okay?
Yeah.
That's good. And you know what? When that thought is done, you're done. Your soul goes back. If you want to call it a mission, if you want, whatever you want to call it whatever you want to call it. When that thought is completed, when you have done what you need to do, whether it's smiling at somebody in an elevator or in the case of a baby, making somebody laugh when they hear a baby laugh, you never know what waves that is creating in the universe, what that is doing, because we are all connected. It was like my stars, okay? I could see each and every one of them distinctly, and yet they were all one. And so what one twinkle did to the one next to it, it did to all of them. And it's the same way with us. What one soul does to another, okay, it does to all of us. So why does Stephanie have to die? I don't know. And, you know, God did not feel it necessary to tell me his overall plan for the universe, all right? He just didn't feel it necessary.
Right.
So, I didn't ask. I didn't need to ask. I just knew that all was well, and that was enough for me.
Yeah, I get it. Like I can see that if you're at that moment feeling one with everything, then Stephanie is part of you. Your husband is part of you because you're one with everything. So you're not going to, at that question, if you're like, why are they separate? It's like, don't you get it? Where I just showed you're one with everything. I get it.
That's right.
So,
and you know what's funny? I had learned about ancestral archetypes and all that other stuff in school. And, you know, I'm trying to put all of this together that, you know, are we all part of this one big whatever that goes back to the beginning of time? Because if you read about ancestral archetypes, you know, and ancestral DNA, you know, we're all the same. And I'm trying to go through theory after theory after theory after theory trying to figure this out, because I don't care who you are, you cannot hold on to the exact feeling that you had when you were there. You can have the memory, absolutely, but to hold on to the feeling, I do not believe that we in this form are capable of doing that. And see, that's one reason now that I still do the centering prayer, trying to get into the contemplative prayer and the focusing, because that can get me close, but it's never, you know, it can get me close. But it's not going to lift that veil again. There's only one entity that can lift that veil, and he did it once, so I had my turn.
Right.
Okay, and I'm not going to get it again.
Well, you'll get it again eventually, because we'll all die. So you'll die,
yes,
I'll
I
die,
will.
and you'll see that again. Do you think everyone
Yes,
experiences the same thing? Because some people are afraid that they're going to go to hell, and like, what happens? Like, yes, you saw Starlight, but while I see, you know, red flames, like, what's your thought on that?
You know what my thought is on that, and I get myself into trouble with this so many times, especially people who are very literal, okay? The hell that you are going to experience is the hell that you put yourself through. You put yourself through, and I have to tell you why I believe that. Because when I was in that presence, there was nothing that even smacked of judgment or anger or any negative emotion or negative thought that you could think of. None of it was there. The separation I talked to you about a little bit ago, when I said I separated myself from the truth of what I found the universe to be, it is in that separation that we create ourselves, that separation from God. And yes, I call it God. I don't call it universe or whatever, or source. If a lot of people are more comfortable with that, that's fine. But for me, God works, okay? And being within that was so phenomenal. And being outside of that, which is what I did to myself, that is hell. That is hell. When you separate yourself from the goodness and the love. I hear people all the time talk about unconditional love, and I just kind of smirk, because everybody thinks unconditional love is like the end all, you know, the whatever. Let me tell you what. That doesn't even come close to what I experienced on the other side. So you're never going to hear me saying unconditional love, because you know what? In this life, I do not believe it exists. Even as parents, who love our children more than anything on this earth, there's always a condition attached to it.
Yeah.
You want them to be something. You want them to do something. From the minute they're born, you start slapping the labels on them, what religion they're going to be, what they're going to do. They're going to tickle their family this. They're going to wear this kind of clothes. They're going to live in this kind of house. And so by the time we get old enough, we have no idea who we were born to be. That's one of the things I do now with my clients. I do something called temperament counseling, which is based on the fact that God knew you in your mother's womb before you were born. And this counseling, I love this test. It takes you right back to that point of who you were before the world got a hold of you. I have people clamor to my door just to get that test. It's the coolest thing. It's the coolest little test. It really is. But, that when you separate yourself from the love that is yours by your birthright, not because of anything you have done, but because of your birthright, because you were that thought of God, that unique one thought of God. When you separate yourself from that, my love, is hell to me. Now, I know there are people who believe in fire and brimstone and all of that, but I got to tell you, CJ, there is nothing worse than being separated from that place. Nothing. And that's why when people say to me, was heaven a literal place? I say, I don't know. And you know what? It doesn't matter. And the reason it doesn't matter is because as long as I am in God's presence, I don't care where it is. It doesn't matter. It could be in the stinkiest, worst dump in the entire universe, but to me it would be pure awesomeness. Okay? You know what I mean? I
love it. Okay,
I don't need the picture. I don't need the picture of, what you had when you were a child and what heaven looks like. That's just a better form of earth.
Right, I get it. This has been fascinating. We've been talking to Sharon Prentice, author of Becoming Starlight, and tell us a little bit about how people can get in touch with you if they have any. I'm sure there's inspired tons of questions. There's a question from one of the listeners asking how they can take this temperance test. Was it called temperance test? Yeah. So tell us how people can get
temperament testing. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
There's two ways they can get me. They can go to my website, which is www.sharonprentice.com. They can join the mailing list there, but they can also send me an email there, and I respond to everybody. It takes me forever, but I respond, okay? I've had people tell me they'll respond for me. No. I respond. And then I also have what they call my professional Facebook page. Doesn't that sound big and fancy? And the reason they did that is because I have two. My personal page where my family is, but the other one, and there's 35,000 people on there now, and it's really freaky because they're all listening to me. Now, that's scary. But, they can go to that, and that is Sharon Prentice, PhD, and they can send me a private message through there. They can also join that community because it's an open community because we talk back and forth. People share stuff, I share stuff, and it's a big open community. But so either one of those places, the website or that Facebook page, and I will be very glad to get back to them and tell whomever all about the temperament testing because it's fun. It's fun. It really is.
Well, thank you so much for being on here. What a beautiful story. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, CJ. I love this, and let's do it again when you're ready. I know you.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.